We now are going to hear from Admiral Richard, who is the Deputy Commander of Stratcom, and my friend Mark Janser is going to be introducing the Admiral.
Thank you, Peter. Before I introduce our last speaker, it's my last chance at the microphone today. On behalf of Task Force 21, I want to just thank everybody who has been in attendance, all our sponsors, our speakers. We appreciate all of you. We thank you for assisting in this important work, and we hope to see you again next year. Vice Admiral Charles Richard is Deputy Commander of U.S. Strategic Command. Richard previously served as the Director of Undersea Warfare Division, N97, in Washington, D.C., and was responsible for planning, programming, and budgeting for acquisition, operational readiness, and the modernization of the submarine force and its support. His other assignments include command of Submarine Group 10 in Kings Bay, Georgia, and Deputy Commander of Joint Functional Component Command for Global Strike at U.S. Strategic Command. Please help me welcome Admiral Charles Richard.
Pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. And it is a great privilege to be here, particularly in such a distinguished group. You had a great group of speakers and a great bunch of folks in the audience, and it's a real privilege for me to be here today. And I'm here on behalf of General Hyten, who also sends his greetings. And I want to give you an update on what Stratcom's doing, particularly with regards to this mission area. Thank you for that kind introduction, right? And Peter, thank you for your career leadership on nuclear issues. Also, the Task Force 21 folks, right? You put on yet again another great forum and opportunity to discuss what I think are some very important issues, right? Remember, nuclear attack is still the most consequential threat this nation faces, right? I think I want to make sure that we don't kind of lose sight of that as we get into this conversation. And to be honest with you, and I said this before last time I was here, I don't think it gets enough dialogue in our national discourse. This is a place where we can attempt to address that, and I have good news to report is I think it's getting more, and I think we're heading in the right direction. Also, I'd be remiss if I stood up in front of you and didn't thank the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians inside U.S. Strategic Command, those that are manning our strategic weapon systems as we speak so that we can be gathered here today. There's 184,000 patriots involved in the Stratcom enterprise worldwide, and they're on watch 24/7, 365 from underwater to outer space, right? They're in Alaska watching for incoming ICBMs. I'll tell you, by the way, the folks in Alaska have been kind of busy here lately. They're in North Dakota, as you well know, sitting in the missile silos. They're under the ocean somewhere, we won't tell you where, in the nuclear-capable submarines. My point behind taking you through all of that is that I submit that they have the most important yet least glamorous job inside the Department of Defense, right? Just for a second, I know many of you have done it yourselves, but this is something where you're going to ask an individual to perform to the very highest standards that the Department of Defense knows how to set because the mission is so important. Yet victory looks like nothing happened. Right, the world you come back to in Kings Bay, Georgia is almost identical to the one you left, right? That's a very big leadership challenge. We do quite well at it, but it's a challenge to explain that to an 18-year-old young man or young woman, why we need you to work so hard. That's the importance of what we do. That's part of the challenge of it. Now, many of you heard me speak at this breakfast series earlier this spring, and General Hyten followed me during the summer, and we both emphasized the need to recapitalize the triad, right? Every word of that is still true today, and I think you've had a great day talking about why we have to recapitalize the triad. All of the triad, right? All of the pieces that we just talked about. Remember, if you were to ask General Hyten which part of the triad is least priority or whatever, remember, he's like, that's like picking between the children, right? In other words, he needs all of those capabilities in order to be able to accomplish the mission the President is asking him to do. And remember, it's triad. It's nuclear command and control. It's a weapons complex that works. You need all of this in order to be able to accomplish the mission. not only do you have to recapitalize it, but you have to sustain what you have today to the point that the recapitalization is ready to relieve the watch. And again, I think we've had a great conversation here today over all of that, things that we have to go do. But today I want to take this conversation maybe a step further, okay, and emphasize the need to go fast, right? The need for speed in every aspect of this mission area. Now, look, we are being outpaced in some cases by our adversaries, potential adversaries, and that puts our deterrence posture at risk. Let me be real clear. Today, you're good, okay? Stratcom is fully capable of executing any mission that it may be asked to do, right? But the trends are not in a good direction right now. For example, Secretary Mattis, former General Mattis, right, told a crowd, the Air Force Association, just this last week, that slow progress and lack of budget predictability puts American security at risk. Quoting, if we fail to adapt at the speed of relevance, then our military forces will lose the very technical and tactical advantages we've enjoyed since World War II. He said that, he's right, and I submit that that's unacceptable. So why do we need to move fast, right? Why do we have this need for speed, right? Why do we need to modernize the Triad, NC3 weapons complex, strategy, and reintroduce a sense of urgency to the process? Well, here's a piece of it, right? A piece of it is that we're back to operating in a threat-based world. There's some very profound implications to that, okay? There's a number of pieces of work going on in the Pentagon. We have submitted that we think that is the starting point for any of a number of reviews and other processes in that you have to consider the threat now. We shouldn't be doing anything in the department that presupposes any other reality. We have not lived in a threat-based world for around 20 or 25 years, okay? Some of us are old enough, maybe others in the room. I can go all the way back to when everything was based on a threat. Not long, I wasn't all that old, right? But it's been a long time. So what's the opposite of being in a threat-based world is when you have no near-peer threat from another country, like the conditions in the world that we had after the Berlin Wall came down, you go into a capabilities-based world, okay? Which was the right answer. That was an appropriate thing for the Department of Defense to do, is to, instead of examining a threat, you simply analyze what capabilities I might need and then go out and accomplish those. Now, what that does, though, it allows a much more analytic approach to things, and it allows you to start to trade down acquisition risk and fiscal risk, because the operational risk that you take actually isn't all that consequential. The change isn't all that much, right? And my speechwriters put the word leisurely in here, right? I don't know if those of you that lived there would describe it as completely leisurely, but there's not the sense of urgency in a capabilities-based world that you do in a threat-based world. Now, we're back there now. We now have multiple potential adversaries who have had the luxury of studying our tactics and capabilities for literally decades. They've all kind of analyzed this and come up with the way they think they might want to challenge us or counter us in each domain. And in order to deter them, and we have to deter all of them, we're going to have to be both analytic and responsive at once, in parallel. So this need to go fast is a consequence of a threat-based world. We have to respond, and we have to get faster in ops, acquisition, policy, and strategy. We have to be thinking about this threat every step of the way. There's another consequence that comes out of having a threat-based world, is that the very challenge of strategic deterrence has changed. Now, our adversaries challenge us in areas where they perceive that we derive our strength, right? In other words, a lot of times we talk about our vulnerabilities in space and cyber and some other areas. Well, part of why you can characterize them as vulnerabilities is because that's where we're deriving great advantage from. And those have changed over time. So let me try this on you, right? The strategic deterrence challenge of the 21st century is the threat of mass destruction or mass disruption or mass vulnerability from a variety of domains, actors, and threat effects. Now contrast that to the world that we operated in the 20th century, and I will admit this is a touch of an oversimplification of how things were there, but in the 20th century, the bulk of those were largely singular, right? There was really one threat, mass destruction, that was really coming from one actor, the Soviet Union, and one attack effect, which was nuclear coupled with an intercontinental delivery system, okay? So that's not the world that we're in anymore. I think General Kaler this morning said, you know, we're not back in the Cold War. Well, here's what's changed that makes that a very true statement. Today, the ways you can achieve a strategic effect have multiplied, right? Particularly, potentially, through space and cyber. Electromagnetic spectrum, another new vehicle that might be used to provide a strategic effect against us. More actors can do it now than could back in those days, and the effect might not only be mass destruction, but it might be mass disruption, right? I think we've all kind of thought through to some level what it would be like to take down large portions of the power grid, for example, or go attack the financial system. Adversaries might exploit also mass vulnerability. So lose your missile defenses, lose your ability to sense an attack in progress, or lose the ability to communicate between the decision makers inside your forces. In fact, it's my belief that creating a mass vulnerability is what some adversaries target in their escalate to win strategies. They're going to make us feel vulnerable, they're going to remove our decision time and option space, and they might be able to essentially drive us to sue for peace on their terms in areas that are less than existential. And at the same time, as the strategic environment increases in complexity, everything is moving ever so much faster. So what's General Hyten's answer to all of this? And his vision for our command at Stratcom is that we become an integrated, all-domain fighting team, warfighting team. And we need to implement tailored and flexible strategies relative to each adversary, underpinned by the very capabilities that y'all have been talking about today, and we have to get the whole enterprise moving faster. So what does that mean? In other words, that integrated all-domain warfighting team has a very Pentagonish feel to it, doesn't it, right, in terms of what we're trying to compress into a very small bullet, right? Well, let me try to unpack it for you just a little bit. We need to have and improve on the ability to look across multiple domains, space, cyber, the more traditional ones, through the lens of multiple competitions that are in progress at the same time, by the way, understanding their interrelationships. And then you analyze it in the basic logic of deterrence, right? The basic logic of deterrence hasn't changed and isn't going to change, right? 21st century deterrence is a lot like second century deterrence in terms of the basic logic that you're applying, right? Can I deny you your aim, or can I impose a cost on you that outweighs your gains that you decide not to do anything, and do you really believe I'm going to do it? You apply that logic frame to it and then quickly determine what actions need to be taken in each domain and execute, right? Simply owning a couple of bombs doesn't deter anybody. It's a very dynamic day-to-day process that has to occur. It's this agile, integrated, multi-domain approach that underpins what we'll eventually call 21st century strategic deterrent. And whoever does this best and fastest will win the competition. So if you were to ask General Hyten what keeps him awake at night, he's not going to answer you with a specific country. He's not going to answer you with a specific capability. He's not going to answer you with a specific scenario. He's going to tell you that we're losing the ability to adapt, that we are being outpaced by our adversaries. And again, be assured, we're ready today, right? If you were to challenge us, it's going to end pretty poorly for you. But how long is that going to be true? How far into the future can somebody like me stand up here and make a statement like that? And part of this is, in some respects, for some good reasons, we have forgotten how to move fast, okay? And in the triad recapitalization, as with all military modernization programs, I submit to you that we have to get back to the basics of speed and innovation, okay? Two quick examples that I think might be good for you. Let's start talking about Captain Hyman Rickover, later, of course, Admiral Hyman Rickover, United States Navy. So in 1949, he gets a task from the Chief of Naval Operations. I need you to put a nuclear reactor in a submarine. Okay, pretty good idea. Hey, the problem is at the time, a nuclear reactor, they were kind of brand new, was about the size of a city block, okay? And what the challenge becomes is now get all of that to fit in a steel tube that's about 28 feet in diameter and make sure it all works, right? Literally having to invent the engineering and in some cases discover the physics necessary to go make this work. And in the span of 5 years, from 1949 to 1954, he did just that, right? He and the Naval Reactors Program. Nautilus launched with a nuclear reactor designed from physics and engineering that didn't exist when he started. That's incredible, okay? And Colonel Collins alluded to some of this a little bit earlier, but there's a similar story in the Air Force, right, with General Schriever. Hey, when they sat down in 1957 and started putting together a 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missile, it didn't exist. They literally drew it out on a piece of paper. Never been designed before, never built. It took $140 million the next year from the Eisenhower administration and a total of $2 billion total in the life of the program, which would be about $17 billion in today's dollars. And in 5 years went from an idea that had never been done before to 800 intercontinental ballistic missiles and the silos and the command and control and the trained and ready forces to go accomplish it, right? Also equally incredible. My point is we can do this. We've done it before, but you're going to have to attack it agile, tailored, flexible, integrated, multi-domain, and you're going to have to change your risk equations in terms of what you're willing to do in the acquisition and programmatic side, understanding what the operational piece is if you don't do that. And Colonel, I was encouraged to hear that we had heard the words of General Hyten and the need to go fast, and it's actually translating down into the program offices. So I wrap that up with, let's not forget what's at stake here. Strategic deterrence is foundational, and nuclear is the foundation underneath that. You know, I ask you, in terms of all the things this nation chooses to spend its money on, that when it comes to defense, if you don't get this part right, i.e. with nuclear, strategic nuclear, I submit to you have two choices, SAT or UNSAT, okay? And you have to get to SAT there before you do the entire rest of the defense strategy program and the things that we want to go off and do, right? And a point on that, okay? I talked about a threat-based environment. I talked about how that's changing very rapidly on us. You would expect, and we are analyzing that as we go forward. And we may find that we may need new capabilities in the future to make sure that we can hold that deterrence equation sound. But I'll tell you the one thing that we know for certain right now is that we need what we have today, right? We need that triad as far into the future as we can see, right? It is hard to come up with a new capability that would be out there that we might somehow desire more than the things that we already have and provide us the ability to do everything that I've talked about. So recapitalization of the triad. Nuclear command and control. Nuclear weapons complex is imperative as our highest priority when we have to go make these decisions. And I think it's not too much of a stretch that if we don't get the deterrence posture right, we're placing at risk every other dollar we spend inside the Department of Defense program. Our adversaries are adapting, and if we're going to deter them, we must outpace them. And here's the piece I kind of want to leave you with, if nothing else, right, is the idea of a sense of urgency, okay? I go to work every day and ask myself, what am I going to do today to improve our ability to deter? Not what's out there next week or something, but what is today's thing that I'm going to do? And I ask you to join me in this. All of y'all play some role in this nation's development of its strategic deterrent capability, and I ask you to join me in that sense of urgency. Bottom line is we've shot all the margin, right? The margins are all gone, and we don't have time for further delay. We have to make the decisions, we have to commit the resources, build the systems, write the CONOPS, and get on with that. So let me thank you for all the work that you do. It's very important. All of you contribute to this discussion in some way.